I won't let you leave.
Malcolm Rayner set the resignation letter on the conference table without looking up. He had rehearsed this moment for 3 days. Keep it brief, no explanations. Walk out before she had a chance to ask questions he couldn't answer. Ilara Voss didn't reach for the letter. She stood on the other side of the table watching him with the kind of stillness that made the room feel smaller. When he finally moved to take the letter back, her eyes dropped to his right hand, to the scar along the back of his wrist, pale and uneven, the kind that only came from fire. She had seen that scar before. Not in this building, not in any meeting or file or quarterly review. She had seen it 8 years ago, through smoke and shattered glass on the hand of the man who had pulled her out of a burning vehicle. Malcolm watched her put it together. He reached for the door. She picked up the resignation letter and tore it in half. "I won't let you leave," she said. A man who spent 8 years hiding in plain sight. A woman who tears up his exit the moment he thinks he's finally free. If this is the kind of story that keeps you listening, subscribe to the channel right now so you don't miss what happens next. Because the real story starts long before that resignation letter ever hit the table. The morning started the way every morning did. Malcolm Rayner was already dressed when Brielle wandered out of her bedroom, her hair a disaster and one sock missing. She dropped into her chair at the kitchen table and stared at the bowl of oatmeal he'd set out, like it had personally offended her. "There's brown sugar on the counter," he said without turning around. She reached for it. He heard the spoon scraping the bottom of the jar. "Dad?" How come you never take me to your office?" He poured his coffee and turned around. Brielle was 8 years old and had her mother's eyes, the kind that didn't let things go. She wasn't asking to make conversation. She was asking because she had been thinking about it, probably for longer than he realized. "It's not a very interesting place," he said. She looked at him for a moment, then she looked back down at her oatmeal. "Okay," she said, "but I don't think that's the real reason." Malcolm set his mug down. He watched her eat. She didn't push further and he didn't offer more, and that was how most of their important conversations ended, with something true left sitting quietly between them, neither of them ready to pick it up. He drove her to school, watched her disappear through the front doors with her backpack hanging off one shoulder, and then he sat in the parking lot for a full minute before pulling back onto the street. At ArcLight Mobility, Malcolm Rayner was known as the kind of engineer you wanted on a problem and didn't need to think about otherwise. He arrived early. He left on time. He didn't attend the leadership dinners, or the product launch celebrations, or the quarterly all-hands where the executives shook hands with journalists and smiled for photographs. When colleagues asked why he said he had to get home to his daughter, which was true, and which everyone accepted without pressing further because it was the kind of answer that made people feel like they were being respectful by not asking more. His desk was clean. No personal items except a small photograph tucked inside the top drawer face down that no one had ever seen. The image was simple Brielle at 5, asleep on a couch with a book open across her chest. He didn't need it visible. He just needed to know it was there. 6 years he had worked at ArcLight. 6 years of competent, quiet, deliberate invisibility. He had been offered 3 promotions and declined all of them. His manager had stopped asking after the second refusal. The work itself was the kind that mattered. He oversaw the safety validation systems for the company's autonomous vehicle fleet, the layer of code and calibration that sat between a moving machine and the people in its path. And he did it with a precision that his team trusted completely, even if they couldn't fully explain why he seemed to take it more seriously than anyone else. Nobody at ArcLight knew what Malcolm Rayner had been before he arrived. They didn't know he had once been one of the most promising young engineers in the autonomous vehicle industry. They didn't know that 8 years ago he had been part of the team at Vantage Systems, a contractor that supplied control software to several autonomous vehicle developers, including ArcLight, developing the algorithm used in the company's third-generation prototype. They didn't know about the accident. And they absolutely didn't know that the woman who had just returned from running ArcLight's European division to take over as CEO was the same woman Malcolm had pulled from a burning vehicle while the rest of the response team was still 50 yards away. He had left before she regained consciousness. He had left because he already knew what had caused the accident, and he already knew that the people above him were going to make sure that knowledge disappeared. He had taken one thing, a copy of the original incident report, stamped before the revisions. For 8 years, that report had sat encrypted on a personal drive in a fireproof box under a floorboard in his bedroom closet. Not because he planned to use it, because he couldn't bring himself to destroy it. Ilara Voss came back to Chicago on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Malcolm had rearranged his schedule to avoid every meeting she was attending. Her first week was consumed by executive briefings and board introductions. His work kept him in the sub-level testing suites where the new fleet software was being validated before the scheduled product certification. That was where he found the problem. He had been running a routine audit on the latest software build when he noticed that 3 crash simulation datasets had been removed from the primary server. The official test reports were intact. On paper, the system's safety scores cleared the regulatory threshold with room to spare. But Malcolm had learned years ago that reports were only as reliable as the data underneath them, and the data underneath them was gone. He spent 2 nights reconstructing what he could from backup fragments. What he found was not ambiguous. Under specific road conditions, low traction surfaces, high-speed lateral inputs, sensor lag above a certain threshold, the braking response failed. Not catastrophically, not every time, but with a consistency that no responsible engineer could sign off on. He went to Nadine Foster. Nadine was 26 and had been with the team for 14 months. She was careful and detail-oriented and had the particular quality Malcolm valued most in junior engineers. She noticed things she wasn't supposed to notice and didn't immediately assume she was wrong. She already knew. She had flagged the discrepancy 6 weeks earlier in a written report to her direct supervisor. Within 48 hours, she had been moved off the validation project, docked a performance rating, and handed a non-disclosure agreement drafted by the legal department. She had signed it because she had student loans and a sick mother and no savings, and because Dorian Wells had sat across from her in a conference room and explained in a tone that was perfectly professional that her continued employment at ArcLight was contingent on her cooperation. Malcolm listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "You did the right thing. Reporting it. That was the right thing." She looked at him like she wasn't sure it had made any difference. He didn't argue the point. Quentin Royce called Malcolm into his office the following morning. He talked about the certification timeline. He talked about the merger, a deal with a European logistics firm that would triple ArcLight's operational capacity and send the stock to numbers the board had been dreaming about for years. He talked about momentum and the importance of not letting internal friction slow down the most significant moment in the company's history. Then he slid a document across the desk. It was the safety certification form. Malcolm's name was printed at the bottom next to a signature line. "I need this by end of week," Quentin said. Malcolm looked at the form. He did not pick it up. "The validation data has gaps. The reports are clean." The reports are clean because the data with problems was removed. The pleasantness in Quentin's expression didn't disappear, it just became something else. Something that understood itself to be in a different kind of conversation now. "I want to be direct with you," he said. "Nadine Foster submitted an incomplete and misclassified report 6 weeks ago. We have documentation showing the errors originated with her handling of the data set. If this becomes a formal dispute, she is the one with exposure." He paused. "Your daughter goes to Westfield Elementary, right? 2nd grade?" The room went very quiet. Malcolm stood up, took the form, and walked out. He worked through that night and the next. He copied every fragment of recoverable test data onto 3 separate encrypted drives and routed one of them, along with a plain language summary document, to an independent safety certification body through an anonymous submission channel. He also left a drive in a plain envelope on Nadine's desk with no note because if things went wrong, he needed her to have it without knowing she had it. Then he built the failsafe. It was not elegant. He was working fast under pressure with limited access to systems that were being watched. What he constructed was a time-delayed transmission program. If he didn't log into a specific private server within 72 hours, the program would automatically route the remaining dataset to the certification body through a chain of encrypted relays. But the program required a physical confirmation code to arm, a code that could only be entered from a legacy testing device sitting in a storage cabinet in the company's abandoned testing garage on the south edge of the property. He drove there, entered the code from the device in the fourth cabinet from the left, the one with the rusted dent on the handle, and locked it again. It wasn't a perfect plan. It was the plan of a man who was tired and frightened and trying to make sure that if he disappeared, the truth would still have one remaining path out. The next morning, he typed his resignation letter. If he was gone, Quentin had no reason to pursue Nadine. The data he had sent would get reviewed eventually, and when it did, it wouldn't matter whether Malcolm Rayner was still employed at ArcLight. And Brielle would not have to watch her father get arrested. That was the part he kept coming back to, not the injustice, just the image of his daughter at the kitchen table already sensing the shape of the thing he wasn't saying. He had spent 8 years keeping her out of this. He could still get her out. He just had to leave before the door closed. Alara Voss received the HR notification at 9:14 in the morning. The company's senior safety engineer had submitted a resignation letter effective immediately with no stated reason beyond personal circumstances. She canceled her 10 o'clock read his file in the elevator and told her assistant to have him brought to conference room B before he reached the door. She had already read 3 things that didn't add up: 6 years at ArcLight 3, declined promotions, 0 disciplinary flags. Engineers with records like that didn't walk away from a certification week without a reason. They walked away because something had gone wrong, or because they knew something was about to. When Malcolm walked in, she watched him take in the room, the closed door, the fact that she was standing, the absence of HR personnel. He calculated something. She could see it in the slight adjustment of his posture, the micro-recalibration of a man deciding how to handle a situation that had not gone according to plan. She asked him to explain his resignation. He said it was a family matter, with the even calm of someone who had prepared for exactly that question. He moved to retrieve the letter from the table. Her eyes dropped to his right hand, to the scar along the back of his wrist. The uneven ridge of tissue that had healed fast and imperfectly, the way skin healed when the wound was treated quickly and without care when the person wearing it had more pressing things to deal with than his own injuries. She had seen that scar illuminated by firelight through the shattered window of a burning vehicle on the hand of the man who had told her to stay awake and keep breathing while he pulled her free. Malcolm watched her put it together. He saw the exact moment it landed. He turned toward the door. She picked up the resignation letter and tore it in half. "I won't let you leave," she said. Malcolm denied it. He said it evenly, without hesitation, the way a man denied something he had been prepared to deny for a long time. He said she was mistaken. He said trauma distorted memory, especially memory formed under physical stress, and that whatever she thought she recognized, she was wrong. Alara looked at him for a long moment, then she unlocked the conference room door and let him go. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at the desk in her father's old office and pulled up Malcolm Rayner's personnel file for the 3rd time. She went through it line by line, not looking for what was there, but for what wasn't. His record at ArcLight was clean, but it was the years before ArcLight that kept snagging her attention. There was a gap. Between his last documented position at Vantage Systems and his first day at ArcLight, there were 11 months with nothing. No employment record, no conference appearances, no published research. 11 months in which Malcolm Rayner had, as far as the paper trail was concerned, ceased to exist. The accident had happened during those 11 months. She cross-referenced Vantage Systems against the technical documentation from the incident 8 years ago. The control algorithm used in the prototype vehicle had been licensed from an external developer. The licensing agreement listed Vantage Systems as the source. Malcolm Rayner had helped build the system that had nearly killed her. and then he had pulled her out of the wreckage of it. She set that aside and kept reading. In the bottom drawer of her father's desk, beneath a stack of printed board minutes, was a small, flat key on a plain ring. No label. The kind of key that didn't announce what it opened. She had found it on her first day and assumed it was for a safe deposit box, one of the dozens of administrative items she hadn't yet sorted through. She had set it aside. But sitting here now thinking about the gap in Malcolm's file and the algorithm and the 11 missing months, she picked it up again and turned it over in her hand. She would deal with it tomorrow. Quentin Royce found out she was looking into Malcolm by Wednesday afternoon. By Thursday morning, Malcolm's system access had been suspended. The official memo cited an internal security review co-signed by the head of IT, copied to the board liaison. All of it procedurally sound and completely impenetrable if you didn't already know what it was. Dorian called Malcolm directly. He told Malcolm that the legal department had received a formal complaint alleging removal of proprietary data prior to resignation. He said the complaint was being taken seriously. He said the cooperative resolution was to return all retained materials immediately. He said the word cooperative twice. Then he mentioned in the same measured tone that custody arrangements were public record and that a pending criminal investigation had a way of complicating those records in ways that were difficult to undo. Malcolm said he understood and ended the call. He sat in his car in his apartment parking garage and stared at the concrete wall. Not because he didn't know what Dorian's call meant. He knew exactly what it meant. He sat there because he was doing what he always did when the thing he had been afraid of finally arrived, taking inventory, counting what was still intact, figuring out what could still be protected. Brielle was at school until 3:15. He had time. He drove to a library 2 miles away, used a public terminal, and confirmed the submission to the independent certification body had been received and flagged for priority review. Timeline 4 to 6 weeks. 4 to 6 weeks was not fast enough. His phone rang. Unknown number, but a personal cell, not a company line. He almost didn't answer. "It's Alara Voss." Her voice was even. "Not a company phone. I know you were at Vantage Systems. I know about the night of the accident. I have a question I need to ask you in person somewhere that isn't being watched." A pause. "The old testing garage, tonight at 8. You don't have to come, but I think you will." She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand for a long time. Not because he was deciding whether to go, he already knew he was going. He sat there because he understood that she had just told him in that single phone call exactly how much she already knew, and that the window in which his silence was still a viable strategy had just closed. The garage was dark when he arrived. Elara had switched on the emergency fluorescence and was already there, standing near the far wall. She had come directly from the office. She had not brought anyone with her, neither had he. They looked at each other across the empty space where prototype vehicles had once been staged. The concrete held faint oil stains and the ghost of painted lines. The air smelled like dust and old rubber. "I found your medical record," she said, "from the night of the accident. You were treated for burns at a clinic 12 miles from the testing site. Your right hand. You paid cash. The clinic logged it at 11:47. The accident was reported at 11:03. She paused. "You were there long enough to pull me out and make sure I was breathing and leave before emergency response arrived." Malcolm said nothing. "Yes or no?" she said. "Yes," he said. Elara absorbed that. Something behind her expression settled the way things settled when a question carried for a long time finally got its answer. "Why did you leave?" he told her. Not quickly and not easily. It came out the way things came out when they had been compressed for a very long time, the pressure giving the words a particular weight. He told her about Vantage Systems and the algorithm. He told her about the warning flags that appeared in the testing data 3 weeks before the demonstration. He told her how those flags had been reviewed, escalated to company leadership, and how the decision had come down to proceed anyway. He told her that her father had been in that meeting. He told her that after the accident, when the formal incident report was being drafted, he had been asked to review the technical section. The version he was shown had the warning flags removed, the cause reclassified as an unforeseen environmental variable language that was careful and technically defensible and bore no resemblance to what the data actually showed. He told her he had refused to sign it, and that he had kept a copy of the original. He told her about his wife, how she had been pregnant, how someone had called their apartment and said things that were not specific enough to act on and specific enough to make the specificity unnecessary. How he had made the calculation that a man with no institutional protection and a pregnant wife was not in a position to fight the legal resources of a company like ArcLight, and that the best thing he could do was disappear and wait for a better moment. He told her his wife had died from complications after Brielle was born. He said it the way he said most things about her, plainly, without dwelling, but the plainness made it land harder than elaboration would have. Ilara was quiet for a long time. "My father was in that meeting," she said, not a question. "He didn't stop the revised report from being filed." She looked at the floor. When she looked up, her eyes were clear, not without feeling, but clear in the way eyes were clear when someone had decided not to let the feeling make the decision for them. "He kept things," she said. "My father. He never threw anything away. If he knew Quentin was responsible for what happened that night, if he knew and couldn't prove it and needed protection, he would have held on to whatever he had. Somewhere no one else would think to look." She glanced around the garage. "He used to come here when I was young. He said it was the only place on the property that still felt like the company was about something real." She paused. "I think Quentin used what he knew to move up. I think my father let him because the alternative was admitting his own role. And I think somewhere in this building there's something my father kept as insurance." Malcolm said nothing, but he understood the logic. It was the same logic he had used to make sense of the 8 years he hadn't been able to prove that people who buried things never buried them completely, because the thing they were hiding was also the thing protecting them. "I need you to stay," Ilara said. "Withdraw the resignation. Help me bring all of it out, not just the current data. 8 years of it." "You're asking me to believe you'll choose the truth over the company," he said, "over your father's name, over your position. I'm asking you to believe that the alternative is worse. If you leave, Quentin wins, Nadine loses, and whatever my father left behind stays buried." She met his eyes. "I'm not keeping you here because you saved my life. I'm keeping you here because you are the only person in that building who has been telling the truth for 8 years, and I need that right now more than I need anything else." Malcolm looked at her for a long moment. He didn't withdraw the resignation that night. But he didn't walk away either. Quentin moved on 3 fronts simultaneously, and he moved fast. He went to the board with a clean presentation, precise language, documented citations. He told them that Malcolm Rayner had a personal grievance against the Voss family, stemming from a prior professional dispute, that he had been exploiting his safety access to build a case that would allow him to either extort the company or manipulate the stock price ahead of the merger announcement. He presented a series of emails with Malcolm's name in the headers, language carefully calibrated to sound like someone who had been planning this for months. The emails had been edited. Malcolm hadn't written any of them in the form they were shown. He also brought Nadine in. Through Dorian, he told her that her NDA was still active, that her original report had been logged as a data handling error on her part, and that if she wanted to continue working in the industry after ArcLight, her best option was to appear at the internal review session and confirm that Malcolm had pressured her to flag discrepancies that she now understood were the result of her own misclassification. Nadine was 26 years old. She had loans and a sick mother and no savings. She said she would think about it. That same night, Quentin's people located the off-site backup server facility where Malcolm had stored his 3rd copy of the reconstructed data. By morning, an electrical fire had gutted the building. The official report would call it an equipment malfunction. The server racks were destroyed. What Malcolm had submitted to the independent certification body remained, but as a transmission without a traceable source, its legal weight depended entirely on whether the original data could be independently verified. Without the backup server, verification was no longer possible. The failsafe in the garage was the last copy that existed. The stock dropped 4 points in 2 days. The board called an emergency session. They wanted the disruption contained before it reached the press and gave the merger partner a reason to pause. Ilara was called in. They presented her with a motion to formally suspend Malcolm pending the internal investigation, with a secondary motion to transfer all disputed materials to the legal department under Wells's supervision. She stood in front of the board and looked at the motion document. She understood exactly what Quentin was doing. He was watching her. If she defended Malcolm publicly in this room, Quentin would know she had something. He would move immediately against the garage, against whatever her father had left behind, against the failsafe before it triggered. He would clean everything up before she got within reach of any of it. If she suspended Malcolm, Quentin would believe he had neutralized her. He would slow down. He would wait for the merger to close. And she would have less than 40 hours before the 72-hour transmission window did it for them. She approved the suspension. She said Malcolm's name clearly. She did not look away from the board when she said it. And she did not look for his face when she left the room, because she knew what she would find there, and she could not afford to let it change the next 12 hours. Malcolm had been watching through the glass partition. He saw her sign the document. He watched her walk out of the boardroom and turn in the opposite direction without looking toward him. He thought of Nadine in that conference room with Dorian Wells across from her. He thought of Brielle asking why he never brought her to his office, already sensing the shape of what he wasn't saying. He thought of 8 years of careful, deliberate silence and everything that silence had and hadn't protected. He collected his badge and his access card, placed them on the reception desk, and walked out. He was going to release the data himself, directly to the press, to the regulators, to every independent body he could reach. It would expose him to every legal risk Dorian had outlined. It might cost him custody. It might cost him everything. But the alternative was watching the same thing happen again to different people in the same building, and he had already done that once. He was still working through the plan when the police knocked on his apartment door at 11:15 that night. Brielle was asleep in the next room. He opened the door. The officer read him the charges: theft of proprietary data system, sabotage, securities manipulation, and Malcolm looked back over his shoulder at the hallway leading to his daughter's room and understood with a clarity that had no anger in it, only the flat recognition of a thing he had always known was possible. I should have moved faster. They let him set his phone on the kitchen counter before they cuffed him. He heard Brielle's door open just before they walked him out. He didn't turn around. He told her in the same voice he used when he said there was brown sugar on the counter and everything was going to be fine, that he would see her very soon and that she should go back to sleep. He didn't know if she believed him. He wasn't sure he believed himself. Ilara didn't go home that night either. She sat in her office until the building quieted, until the last of the evening security rotation passed her floor and the hallways went dim. Then she opened the bottom drawer of her father's desk and took out the small flat key. She thought about what Malcolm had said in the garage. People who bury things never bury them completely. The thing they're hiding is also the thing protecting them. Her father had never thrown anything away. He had filed things not by what they were, but by where he wanted to be when he needed them. He had loved the testing garage. She put on her coat. The garage was dark. She moved through it with her phone light past the oil-stained concrete and the ghost of the painted staging lines toward the row of old storage cabinets along the far wall. She knew this room. She had stood in it as a child, watching her father walk the length of it with his hands in his pockets, telling her that this was where the real work happened. Not in boardrooms, not in press releases, but here, where the machines either worked or they didn't. He had always stopped at the fourth cabinet from the left, the one with the rusted dent on the handle. "Nobody ever touches this one," he used to say. "That's why I like it." She had assumed it was the kind of thing fathers said to sound interesting to their children. She pressed the key into the lock. It turned. Inside, on the top shelf, was a gray metal case. Inside the case were two things: a hard drive in a static-proof sleeve and a sealed envelope with her name on the front in her father's handwriting. She sat down on the concrete floor and opened the envelope. He had written it 2 years before he died. The handwriting was steady, not a deathbed letter, not something composed in crisis. It was the handwriting of a man who had decided deliberately to put something into words while he still could. He told her about the meeting, the one Malcolm had described. He told her about the warning flags and the decision to proceed anyway, driven by a merger timeline that had existed even then, a smaller deal, a different partner, but the same logic. Schedule over safety, momentum over caution. He told her that Quentin Royce had been the one to recommend proceeding, that Quentin had drafted the revised incident report language after the accident, that 3 days later, Quentin had come to him with a copy of the original flag data and explained in the same measured professional tone that Dorian Wells had since inherited from him, that this information could be managed quietly or it could be managed publicly, and that the public option would destroy not just the company, but the family name that had built it. Her father had chosen the quiet option. He wrote that he had told himself it was to protect the company, to protect the employees, to protect her eventually since the company would one day be hers. He wrote that he had believed those things for a while and stopped believing them somewhere around the 5th or 6th year when it became clear that Quentin understood the arrangement differently, not as a mutual decision made under duress, but as a debt that could be called in indefinitely. He wrote, "I kept the video because I needed him to know I had it. I thought it would keep him cautious. I didn't understand that the only thing it actually protected was his confidence that I would never use it against myself." He wrote, "If you are reading this, it means I ran out of time to fix it myself. I am sorry that I am leaving it to you. I am sorry for a great many things. But I am most sorry that I chose the version of this story where I survived it and left you with the version where you have to." She sat on the concrete floor for a long time after she finished reading. Then she stood up, put the letter back in the envelope, and walked to the storage cabinet beside the one her father had used. Malcolm had installed the fail-safe device here. She understood that now. This was why he had chosen this garage specifically, why he had parked outside it the night before his resignation. She had noticed his car on the security log and noted the location without knowing what it meant. She knew now. She found the device on the lower shelf, a piece of legacy testing hardware, small and nondescript, connected to nothing. She examined the interface, worked through the logic of what Malcolm had built, and understood the architecture within 20 minutes. The 72-hour window had been set at 11:43 on the night he had come here. She had roughly 9 hours remaining. She entered the confirmation code using the device credentials documented on the case label, armed the transmission, and watched the indicator light shift from amber to green. In 9 hours, the full data set would route automatically to the independent certification body. Then she sat back down at the work table in the corner, opened her father's hard drive on her laptop, and spent the next 4 hours going through everything on it before she had to speak about any of it in public. She called her communications director at 5 in the morning and told him to arrange a press briefing at 7. She told him it was not optional. She told him if he needed a reason to give people, he could say the CEO had a statement about the safety certification timeline. Then she called the Federal Regulatory Office's after-hours compliance line and told them to expect a document submission from an independent review body before sunrise and to treat it as a priority flag. At 6:40 that same morning, Nadine Foster was sitting in her car in her apartment parking lot, unable to sleep, scrolling through a news alert on her phone. ArcLight mobility engineer arrested on charges of corporate espionage and securities fraud. The photograph beside the headline was Malcolm's company ID photo, the same face she had seen in the hallway outside the testing suite 3 weeks ago when he had handed her a plain envelope without a word and walked away. She had opened it that night and found a hard drive and a single sheet of paper, a printout of the original flag test data with a small note clipped to the corner. "Keep this somewhere safe. You'll know when to use it." She had kept it. She was a careful person. Malcolm had taught her that careful people kept things. She sat in her car and thought about the NDA she had signed. She thought about Dorian Wells across the conference table with his reasonable professional tone. She thought about the fact that a man who had never asked her for anything except to do her job well was sitting in a cell right now because he had done his job better than the people above him wanted him to. She looked at the hard drive in her glove compartment, then she started the car. The briefing room held 40 people. By 6:50, it held 60. Ilara stood at the front and waited for the cameras to settle. She had no notes. Notes implied craft, and what she needed people to understand from the first sentence was that what she was about to say had not been crafted. It was simply what had happened. She told them about the accident. She told them about the data. She told them about her father's role in what had been covered up and Quentin Royce's role in initiating it. She told them about Nadine Foster, who had tried to report the current data discrepancies through proper channels and had been threatened and silenced. She told them about Malcolm Rayner, who had spent 8 years working quietly in the background of the company that had destroyed his career, maintaining the safety systems no one else was watching closely enough, and who was currently in a holding facility on charges manufactured to keep him from being heard. She said she was prepared to step down as CEO if the board determined that was necessary. She said that what was not negotiable was this: the merger would not close, the product would not certify, and no version of this story would be allowed to proceed in which the people who had told the truth paid for it, and the people who had suppressed it did not. Quentin appeared at the back of the room 11 minutes in. He had 2 people from legal with him and was pushing toward the front. She watched him calculate in real time whether there was a version of the next 5 minutes that worked in his favor. There wasn't. Because she wasn't the only one talking. Nadine Foster stepped up to the secondary microphone. She looked like someone who hadn't slept. She also looked like someone who had made a decision and was done renegotiating it with herself. She confirmed everything. She described the original report she had filed. She described the meeting with Dorian Wells. She described finding an envelope on her desk with no note, a hard drive that contained the reconstructed test data, which she had reviewed and recognized as consistent with what she had originally flagged. She said she had kept it because she was a careful person, and because the man who had left it for her had taught her by example that careful people kept things even when they didn't know yet what they were keeping them for. She said she had been afraid. She said she was still afraid. She said she was here anyway because a man who had never asked her for anything was sitting in a cell for doing the right thing, and she had decided that was no longer something she could live with. Quentin left the room before she finished. The federal agents waiting in the lobby since 6:45 were ready for him when he got there. Malcolm was released at 2:17 in the afternoon. The charges had been suspended pending federal review, with a prosecutorial note indicating the evidentiary basis had been compromised by contradicting documentation. In plain terms, everything Quentin had built the arrest on had been publicly dismantled before 9 in the morning. He walked out through the front entrance into pale afternoon light. Ilara was standing on the sidewalk, alone. No assistant, no security detail. She was wearing a coat too light for the weather and looked like someone who had been awake for 36 hours, which she had. Malcolm stopped a few feet from her. "You suspended me," he said. "Yes." "In front of the board. You signed the document." "Yes." He was quiet, not angry or not only angry, working through it the way he worked through everything, following the logic until it arrived somewhere true. "If you'd defended me publicly," he said, "Quentin would have known you had something. He would have moved before I reached the garage, before I found what my father left, before the transmission window closed." She met his eyes. "I needed him to believe I had made the same choice my father made. It was the only way to keep him from looking at what I was actually doing." "So, you needed me to believe you'd betrayed me. I needed you to be angry enough that it was real. If you'd known, it wouldn't have been." He stood with that. "You let my daughter watch me get arrested," he said. Ilara didn't look away. "I know." The afternoon light was flat and cold and very clear. "My father left a letter," she said. "He wrote it 2 years before he died. He explained everything: his role, Quentin's role, why he kept the evidence instead of using it." She paused. He wrote that he chose the version of the story where he survived it and left me with the version where I had to clean it up. She held his gaze. I didn't want to become that, and I didn't want you to keep being the version of yourself that disappears every time the cost of staying gets too high. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. Nadine came, he said. She came on her own. Her words, her choice. Alara paused. She said you taught her that careful people keep things. Something shifted in his expression, small and contained the way things shifted in Malcolm Rayner when something landed and he hadn't intended for it to show. The board met the following week. They asked Alara to return as CEO, framed as an acknowledgement that she was the only person in the organization who had demonstrated both the capability and the judgment to lead the company through what came next. She accepted with 3 conditions. First, a complete restructuring of the internal safety review process with an independent oversight panel reporting directly to the board rather than through operations. Second, Nadine Foster's full reinstatement with back pay, a formal written apology from the company, and a seat on the newly formed Technical Ethics Committee. Third, Malcolm. She offered him a newly created position, Director of Independent Safety, with unilateral authority to halt any product, process, or certification that failed to meet the standard he set. The role answered to the board and to the regulators and to nothing inside the operations chain of command. He took 2 days to think about it. He told Brielle that night at the kitchen table while she was doing homework. He told her the new job would be different, more visible, his name on things, some days complicated. He said he was thinking about taking it. Brielle looked up from her worksheet. "Does that mean I can visit?" "If you want to," he said. "I want to." She looked back at her homework. "I've always wanted to." He stood at the counter for a moment, then he said yes. 4 months later, Malcolm walked back into ArcLight Mobility with his name on the building directory and his office on the same floor as the CEO. He still arrived early. He still left in time to pick up Brielle, but Brielle's photograph no longer lived in a drawer. It sat on the corner of his desk where anyone who walked in could see it. A girl with her mother's eyes and an open book across her chest, asleep on an ordinary afternoon. On a Tuesday evening in November, he walked into Alara's office with a single sheet of paper and set it on her desk. She looked at the header at the top. Letter of Resignation. She looked up sharply. Malcolm sat down in the chair across from her and looked at the document with the care he used for things that required careful handling. "It's the original," he said. "The one I brought in. You tore the copy they gave me at the front desk, not this one." He reached across, picked it up, and tore it in half. Then he set both halves down in front of her. "Now it's done." Alara looked at the 2 pieces of paper. "Does that mean you're staying?" she said. "It means I'm staying as long as this company keeps putting human life above the bottom line." He stood and pushed the chair back. "Which I intend to make very difficult to stop doing." He turned toward the door. She stood. "I told you," she said. "I won't let you leave." Malcolm stopped with his hand on the doorframe. His back was to her, but she could see his shoulders settle the specific way a man settled when he stopped bracing for something. He turned around. For the first time since she had met him, he didn't look like a man calculating the distance to the exit. He held the door open and waited. She picked up her coat and walked through it. They left together not as CEO and subordinate, not as creditor and debt, not as the woman who had been saved and the man who had done the saving. Just 2 people who had looked at the version of the story where they stayed silent and chosen at considerable cost not to tell it. The door closed behind them. On the desk, the 2 halves of the resignation letter sat side by side, edges touching. Malcolm spent 8 years believing the safest thing he could do was stay invisible. That keeping quiet was the same as keeping his daughter safe. But silence doesn't protect the people we love. It just delays the cost and lets someone else pay it instead. The real act of courage in this story wasn't pulling someone out of a burning car. It was choosing to stop running when running was still possible. It was Nadine walking into that room still afraid. It was a Lara standing on a sidewalk with no title, waiting for a man she had no right to ask anything of. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. New stories drop every week, and every one of them is about people who chose the harder, truer version of themselves when it counted most. We'll see you in the next one.